Hello and welcome back to Forza Horizon 5 with a little bit of a challenge, focusing on this, the Dodge Viper 10th Anniversary Edition. And I chose this in particular to mess about with because, as we saw with our Hot Wheels build series, even with rally tires, it is a grip monster. And I would argue that is because of the aerodynamics. I really sincerely believe this is the future of Forza Aero because this has a massive rear wing, even bigger than normal Forza Aero, a even bigger diffuser, or front splitter, and it has a diffuser, spoiler alert. The diffuser, unlike every other diffuser ever in the history of Forza so far, actually generates real downforce, which means the Viper 10th Anniversary Edition stock makes over 1,200 pounds of downforce. That is an insane amount. That's like 3 or 4 times what normal Forza Aero makes, and that makes it a force to be reckoned with on a twisty circuit. It also puts it into low S2 class. 907 is what I have in the game, so this is technically modified, but the only thing I've done to it is Forza Aero, and that got me thinking. What would it take to beat the 10th Anniversary Viper, and could you do it for less PI? Well, I found a very technical circuit, really to highlight the grip that each of these vehicles have, and went to find out. Now we start off with the 10th Anniversary Viper. Just as a baseline, each vehicle is given 10 laps, given the nature of S2 class vehicles being very fast and very prone to mistakes. If you make one movement too much on the stick, it flings you into a wall. So I gave it 10 laps. Plus, they're pretty short. They're about 40-something seconds per lap. So, you know, always a little more time is good to get familiar with the vehicles. And the Viper, yeah, it's grippy. The corner speed is mind-boggling. You can get 385 tires on this car. Again, this only has the Aero kit, nothing else. You can get racing slicks with the full tires, so technically speaking this vehicle could get even grippier, which is terrifying because this is an insanely grippy vehicle. It can get a little bit of oversteer. It's not perfect in that respect. I did manage to get it sideways once in a while, but you really have to be way over the limit in order to get it sideways or lose traction or anything like that, because it's just so good to drive. I mean, it's so composed. The brakes are so good because the grip is so good. And you can just carry the corner speed everywhere you go. It's an amazing machine to drive. It's again, I sort of mentioned this a few times in the last few videos, but it is like the Volkswagen IDR. It just turns. There's no shenanigans. It just does. So, in the end, it did a 42.192. That would be the benchmark that the other cars would have to beat, and they had to do it bone stock. Now, I just wanted to start things off to ensure that you could beat the Viper 10th Anniversary on such a technical track, so I went with the very top of S2 Class 998 with the old FXX-K Evo from Ferrari, because while their F1 team may suck, their track-only special are very good. So, the Viper about 640 horsepower, 600 torque with the Aero kit. This has 1,000 horsepower with the Aero kit, and it's about the same way. I think the Viper's a little bit lighter, but it's not by a crazy amount. Yeah, this is a very quick vehicle. In fact, it was so quick that when I did my laps with it, it broke my track record for it. Yeah. It did a 38.4. It's very quick. Because not only does it have the grip of the Viper, but it also has, 400 horsepower more. And that means it accelerates a lot faster than the Viper. It gets up to some seriously high speeds, despite being, again, a very technical track. I wanted to find a track that had a lot of corners in it, not a lot of straightaways, because as we saw on the Hot Wheels series, the 10th Anniversary Viper does not like straightaways at all. So I wanted to focus purely on the grip and the aerodynamics, and I think the Bola Ocho circuit is excellent at that. That being said, the FXX-K Evo still went over 135 miles an hour. I think it approached 170 on some of the corners on the longest start-finish straightaway. It's quick. It's a quick car. Yeah, it's not very often you go 3 seconds, 3+ seconds faster than your target time, but it's also very high on the PI scale, so let's dial that down a fair bit. All the way down to a road car, one of the highest PI road cars you can get in this game, the Koenigsegg 1-1 S2 983. Now, I wanted to bring this up for a very particular reason to show why PI ratings are not necessarily the end-all be-all for lap times, because it very much depends on your circuit. The Koenigsegg is probably the easiest to drive. I was debating between the Koenigsegg 1-1 and the Jesko, but I figured with the weird Jesko gearbox, like 10 gears, you had to start in 4th, some crazy amount of wheel spin. I figured the 1-1 would be a better handling car, and I think I was right in that classification. And despite having over 1,200 horsepower and being a very quick car, it did not beat the Viper, which surprised me, kind of. I mean, I was expecting this to give it a shot. I didn't realize it would be 0.8 of a second slower. That's a lot on a very short track. 0.8 of a second, 43 dead is what the 1-1 did. And it just doesn't have the grip. It has the speed of the FXX-K, but it has nowhere near the grip or the traction. This was a very challenging vehicle to drive. It just did not have the pace, which is a shame, because the 1-1 is a very impressive vehicle, but again, it doesn't have the aerodynamics. It's a bit too powerful, I'd argue, actually, for this circuit to go along with that, because it just spins the wheels up. So if it had 1,000 horsepower instead of 1,200, maybe even 800 horsepower, it would probably actually be a faster lap time, because I could put more of the power to the road. But I can't in this. I have to manage the throttle. It gets sideways. I gotta be really careful. I can't drive it as confidently as I can the Viper or the FXX-K. It's just a bit more dangerous, shall we say. But that's the challenge. That's the challenge. You got to be able to use what power you have in order to get a great lap time. Which is why I lowered the PI again to try and get more speed. I'm talking about this hypercar killer, the Ultimate GTR, because if you need to beat something, the Ultimate GTR is a pretty darn good choice, pretty much no matter what you're doing, unless it's a budget build, and even then, it's not bad. So this is in the middle of S2 class, essentially, 1,000 horsepower, about 2,500 pounds. It is rear-wheel drive, though, and it does not have the aerodynamics of the Viper, but it's also so much lighter. I mean, it's the lightest car here. Well, about the lightest car here. There's another one coming up pretty quick that might be lighter. I don't know the exact number, but either way, it's incredibly light. Great power-weight ratio. Easily the best power-weight ratio. That it is for sure. But it still didn't beat the Viper. And it's the same problem as the 1-1. It's basically a better 1-1. It's 0.6 of a second faster than the Koenigsegg, but it's still 0.3 of a second down, near enough, on the Viper. Which, again, it has 400 horsepower more, and it's lighter. And it's still slower than that Viper. With the same driveline. It doesn't even have an all-wheel drive advantage. We'll get to those in a second as well. And it couldn't do it. It could not do it. It was very strange. I thought it could do it. Once I started seeing it was getting to the 42, I was getting a little excited, to be honest. Thinking, is the Ultimate actually going to pull this off? No. It did good for a road car with not exactly the most sophisticated aero kit known to man. It did a bloody good job, but it is still just over 0.2 of a second slower. That's a haiku. If the road cars weren't doing the job and the FXX-K obliterated it while being way too high on the PI scale, let's drop it down even further to 936 with the only all-wheel drive car of the day, the Lamborghini Sesto Elemento. It's pretty much the perfect car for this. It's got the all-wheel drive to help manage the bumps. It's got about 570 horsepower, so it is one of the least powerful vehicles here. But but it's very light. It's Ultimate GTR light. And it has a similarly type Aero kit, which is not ideal. However, it is so good to drive. It doesn't have the Aero kit, and it doesn't have the raw power of other vehicles, but it is so composed. No matter what you do, it was so nice to drive. It's honestly probably one of the nicest cars here to drive. It's so good. And it did it. It beat the Dodge Viper. It wasn't for less PI, but it did beat it. It did a 41.875, so not a crazy amount faster, about 0.3 of a second. But it doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile. Winning is winning, and that is exactly what the Sesto Elemento did. And it shows the value of confidence in your car, because this has a lot of raw pace. But it's 100 horsepower down even the Viper. So you're going to have to be brave. You're going to have to feel confident enough to maximize the G-forces and the grip and the acceleration that you can get with that very light carbon fiber all-wheel drive combination. And it's a very good combination. It is so nice to drive. I can't get over how nice of a car it is to drive. I love the fact that the Sesto is actually able to beat it. I was a little skeptical, not gonna lie, because of the sheer lack of horsepower, but it did a bloody good job. Now, I did have one last ace up my hypercar sleeve, the McLaren Senna. This is just 2 PI points lower than the Sesto Elemento, and, well, it did a lot worse. This was sort of disappointing to me. I was hoping the Senna would be a lot better than it was. I just couldn't get the pace out of it. It wasn't terrible in any category, but it wasn't great in either category either. It had okay power delivery. It has 800 horsepower, so it's going to be difficult going through the rear wheels. And yeah, it struggled. Less than the Ultima, but that doesn't matter. It still struggled. And when you do get traction, it doesn't have the same sheer power to weight ratio as the Ultima. And it has more aero than the length of the Ultima or the Sesto Elemento, but it's a road car. It's got road tires. So it has less grip than the Sesto, and it's heavier, despite being an ultimate track star. And that meant it could only do a 42.9. It wasn't even the fastest road car yet. It was faster than the 1-to-1, but it was slower than the Ultima, which is sort of embarrassing for the Senna, not gonna lie. It disappointed me this one a lot. I thought this would do pretty good. I thought it would give the Viper a run for its money, but it was 0.8 of a second slower. And again, I think it's just overall pace. There's nothing inherently terrible about it, but it can't carry the same corner speed as the Sesto, because you don't have the same confidence in it, and it doesn't have the same sheer brutal acceleration as the Ultima, which is what gave the Ultima its contention. And it's just a sort of 75% pretty much. It's like a C+ on a grade. It's not terrible. You still pass, but it's not really what you wanted, which is it's disappointing, really. So let's drop the PI even further. Try and get back to the track-only specials of the Ferrari 599XX. I felt a little guilty not running it in the track special shootout, but I'm glad we were able to use it here because the 599 Evo is a little bit too high on the PI scale for this, especially because it's right next to the Ultima, but the 599XX, the normal version, the normal air quotes, is much more reasonable, only 924, and again, it was okay. I was sort of hoping it would be on the same level as the FXX-K, and it was not. It has about 700 horsepower, and it's moderately light for its vehicle class, I guess. It's got a big old V12, it's got decent aero, but nothing crazy. It can honestly use a little more aero, and that just made it struggle. It was better than the Senna, but the crazy thing is that it's slower than the Ultima. Yeah. The crazy track-only Ferrari got beaten by a kit car from Britain. It's like 1960s Formula 1 all over again. It's strange, the 599 wasn't a terrible car, but it's much like the Senna. it was lacking overall pace. It wasn't terrible in any section, but in every section, it was 9/10. And over the course of a lap, 9/10 every section just costs you too much time, so a 42.6 was the best that the 599 can manage, 4/10 of a second slower than the Viper. So that's pretty much it, right? I mean, you can't have much else that can really stand a chance against the Viper, and vehicles that are higher PI are struggling to get near it. But then I remember there was a new car added during the Hot Wheels expansion, the Mosler MT900 GT3 car. This is very low S2 class, I'm talking S2 910, because it has no power. It has less than 600 horsepower, and it's got a crazy aero kit, which means its top speed, which is factored into the PI rating, is abysmal. Now that brings the PI down while keeping the grip levels up, which is a perfect combination for what we need here. And you know how I said the Sesto was one of the best handling cars here? But the Mosler was the best. It was so fast. I could go flat out through a whole lot of corners that you couldn't go flat out even in the Senna. But since the Mosler was just a GT3 race car, you could go flat out. And it was grippy, so it may not have the power, but you can carry the speed better than any other vehicle here, short of maybe the Ferrari. The FXX-K, not the 599. Yeah, the Mosler was brutally fast. Not necessarily in a straight line, but you could tell that it was carrying the speed better than any other vehicle, and that meant it actually got the second fastest time of the day. It did a 41.3, so it's, 3 seconds off the FXX-K, but it's faster than the Sesto, it's faster than the Viper. I mean, that's a very impressive showing for less than 570 horsepower, rear-wheel drive no less. It's a bloody good handling car. It is not quite my favorite car of the Hot Wheels expansion. I think that still goes to the Brabham, the BT62, and the Copo Camaro. But handling-wise, there is not much else that can get near this thing. It is so grippy. It's actually grippier than the Viper because it doesn't have the power advantage. And yes, it helps that it is on racing tires because, well, it's a GT3 car. The Viper is still on these Horizon semi-slicks, whatever the equivalent is for the 10th anniversary. So you can upgrade that further. If this was truly fair, the Viper would be on slicks, but then nothing would even get close. And this is all about beating the Viper's aerodynamics, not necessarily the tire compound, so, just roll with it. And regardless, the Mosler is a bloody impressive vehicle. But that sort of begs the question. Now we're at sub 910 for the PI scale. We're running out of vehicles to use. So, I decided to fight fire with fire. And I brought in the final generation Dodge Viper ACR, the VX. This is 873. It's one of the few S1 class cars that can get semi-slick tires or above. This is on semi-slicks, so road legal racing tires essentially. And it has a similar aero kit to the 10th anniversary. I was kind of spitballing. These last few vehicles are sort of speculative things. That, oh, well, I gotta give it a shot at least. The Viper was the best shot I had for normal road cars in S1 class. It's very grippy. It's got great gear ratios for this, very long gear ratio, so it's not going to get oversteer or anything like that. And it still has the crazy aero kit, although not quite as crazy as the 10th anniversary edition. It's basically just a 10th anniversary, but a bit worse. And that reflects on the lap time. It did a 44.153. Which is a very impressive time, but it's a fair way off the Viper. In fact, the Viper is 2 seconds slower than the Viper 10th anniversary, which is not to be unexpected. That's double negative. It is to be expected. I mean, I was sort of spitballing here. I was trying to see what would stick and what wouldn't, and the ACR Viper, while it's stuck to the ground, it did not stick to setting a fast lap time. So normal road cars, let's say the Viper ACR, normal road cars, they're out. The GT2 RS, the Pista, The Aventador maybe, but I already had a few Lambos in here wanting to boost things up a little bit. They wouldn't do it. They were not going to have the pace. The ACR Viper in this situation would probably be the best of the bunch, based on its aero kit and the gear ratios and everything. So instead I started focusing more on track stars in this, and there's really only a few options. It's a very limited window. And the BAC Mono is one of them, 868 PI, and I thought this would be really good, especially because I tested the Volvio 5RR, and that was awful. It got horrific understeer, and I thought, oh, the Mono, it's a single-seater, it's got no weight, it only has 280 horsepower, but it weighs less than 2,000 pounds, this will be great. It was not. It was not. At all. It just couldn't turn in. Maybe I was a little bit spoiled by the Ferraris and the Mosler and the Sesto Elemento, but the Mono just would not turn. Which is weird to say about a BAC Mono, but in this field, it did feel like I was driving a Greyhound bus. Just didn't do anything. And then, it only has 200-something horsepower to propel you on the way out, so it has to carry the corner speed, but compared to vehicles in this field, it can't carry corner speed. So it just sort of struggles everywhere. It has no acceleration on the straightaway, and cornering grip in this field leaves a lot to be desired. So it can only muster a 45.112. In fact, it's the only car to get above a 44 and above a 45, in fact. So a bit disappointing from the Mono, I'm not gonna lie. Which brings me to my final car, a car that, well, it's the lowest PI here, 845. And it's KTM Crossbow GT4 car. But don't be fooled by the PI rating, because this is a bloody brilliant car. Sure, it only has 300-something horsepower, but it's a full-on GT4 car. It's basically a Mosler with half the horsepower. And that means it's also really good handling. If the Mosler was flat out in most places, this was flat out just about everywhere, because it has no power to kick the rear end out, and it has full-on racing slicks and racing aero and everything. It's a bloody good handling car, which means despite having literally half the horsepower, or in some cases a third of the horsepower of other vehicles, I think it has a quarter of the horsepower of the Koenigsegg, for Christ's sake, it did a 43.1. It nearly beat the Koenigsegg, which has 4 times as much horsepower. It was faster than the Viper ACR normal vehicle. I mean, a 43.1 in a vehicle that slow is purely based off of cornering speed and carrying the momentum. It was super, super impressive. I was really proud of the KTM. It lost by a whole second, but being only a second down on a vehicle with double the horsepower and similar weights, it's no small feat. Yeah, it will go down on this list on the leaderboard as pretty slow by comparison. I mean, it's 5 seconds off the pace of the FXX-K. But everything's relative here. It's so good handling. I had absolute confidence in it, much like the Sesto Elemento. I had absolute confidence, absolute faith, and I was able to completely thrash it, and it never missed a beat. The Mosler will take victory, because it got closest to the PI rating of 907 for the Viper 10th anniversary. And yeah, it was probably, despite the KTM, the best handling car here, which is why it got such a good lap time. And yeah, the Sesto is also the only car to come close, because the FXX-K is a little bit cheating, being 998. But saying all that, the KTM really impressed me. It was easily the most impressive vehicle here. I was expecting the FXX-K. I was kind of expecting the Mosler, just because of the grip levels. The Sesto was a bit of an oddball that did surprisingly well. But the KTM, for being so much lower than everything else here, it punched well above its weight class, and I gotta give it a round of applause for that. I mean, credit where it's due. Nothing could beat the Viper. If I built a car to the top of S1 class, I could easily beat it. I mean, if I just gave the KTM a lot more horsepower, I could probably beat the VIPER. If I just built it to the top of S1 class as a power build. It has so much grip it could probably do it. But that's not the challenge. The challenge was to do it stock. And technically nothing did. Certainly for less PI. Only 3 vehicles today actually did manage to beat the VIPER outright. Which speaks volumes to the Aero kit on that vehicle because it is not on racing slicks. And every single vehicle that beat it was a full-on track car. Whether it be multi-million-dollar track specials like the Ferrari and the Lamborghini, or a full-bore FIA GT3 car. Everything else didn't really come close. The Ultimate GTR did a good job for being on road tires, being able to come that close through sheer power-weight ratio. But even the mighty Ultima could not beat the VIPER. And after that list, nothing really got close. I still believe there's going to be the new Forza Aero kit heading into the new rebooted Motorsport game that comes out next year. And if this is the Aero kit that we are potentially getting, we're about to get some seriously fast vehicles. I hope they continue to add more Aero kits like this to future update vehicles. But in the meantime, the 10th anniversary is one hell of a gift. But that'll be it for this episode of Forza Horizon 5. I'll be back with more